Thank you everybody for coming and not running the 5K today. It's funny, so this is getting to be like family reunion. Once a month we all get together and I stand here and talk to you. So a couple of housekeeping drills. Please silence your phones. Hold your questions until the end, because any of you that have seen me before, you know that if you get me off track, way late. You'll be late for work on Monday. So, can you hear me okay? Magnificent. Can we see? Looks pretty good up here. The light looks okay. It's all in focus. Magnificent. I am also going to warn you right here and now. When I came out to do the research for this program, I went to all of your cemeteries in town and I took pictures, which is totally normal for what I do. That's what I built today's program around. I probably took about 400 pictures in a day. So I hope you all have time. We'll look at every single one of them. No, we won't. But there's a ridiculous amount of content here, and particularly when I get to the colonial stuff, I'm going to completely geek out because I found so much good stuff right here in town. So we'll get started. Welcome to the graveyard. This is your tour of cemetery art and history and symbolism with the Gravestone Girls. You may or may not know, as you've been here before, this is a shot of the 3 Gravestone Girls, 3 original, and there are many more. Gravestone Girls in our natural habitat. That's me, I'm Brenda, that's Melissa, she's our web mistress, and that's Maggie, my best friend for most of my life. We don't put a number on it anymore, but Melissa grew up out in Western Mass. Mag and I grew up in Central Mass, and together and separately we have been traversing cemeteries most of our lives. Gravestone Girls' mission is keeping our dead alive by preserving cemetery art and history. Shameless self-promotion, gravestonegirls.com. Also on social media, Facebook and Instagram. If you're not following us, please do. I want my numbers up. But also we have fully started the season, so we're going to be straight out from here until the end of the year. There's a lot of travel coming up. And I try to post and do video and go live from the field so you can all see what I see as I travel around the country. Gravestone Girls do a bunch of different stuff. Public presentations like this. We want to show you what's on your main streets and on your back roads and why it looks like it does. We lead cemetery walking tours, so we do this is a virtual tour today from the comfort of the library, but we also go out in the field and take a walk and see what we see. I also teach responsible tombstone cleaning and tombstone rubbing methods. Last month we did do a rubbing demonstration here. There's a lot of misinformation and misconception about cleaning and rubbing old tombstones, and mostly our mission is to bust those myths and make sure that if it gets done, it's done properly. I always make a joke that, teaching that stuff is like teaching kids about sex. They're going to do it anyway, so you might as well do it safely. That being said, I grew up in my family cemetery doing gravestone rubbings. Years go by, I've got an art history and restoration education. I've got a lot of 2-dimensional pieces of paper with gravestone imagery on it. I want to take some of my friends home, so I developed a process I can safely take into the cemetery and collect the images from the faces of the stones and replicate them. So it was just me and Maggie practicing different techniques long before we went out into the field, and once we did perfect it, went out, do it safely, we just started making pieces for ourselves, and the joke quickly became nothing says Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday like a gravestone. So people started getting them as gifts, and then people said, can you make me something to give somebody as a gift? And years go by, and here I am, all right, we'll put a number on it, 30-something years later, doing all this art and education and having a great opportunity to have a a job where I get to go and play in the cemeteries. I get to travel, and I get to meet great people, and I also get to show you what I see when I'm out and about. So before we get started on our tour, we got to answer two basic questions about the origin and the evolution of the cemetery. So why do we bury the dead, and where do gravestones come from? Those of you that saw me last month with the rubbing class, I gave you a little condensed version of this, so a little of it might be familiar to you because there's so many familiar faces in the room from last month. But we're going to delve a lot deeper today. But we still do have to start at the beginning with that origin and evolution, answering those questions. So we bury the dead because we're mortal. We only have a certain amount of time. When that time is up, we dig a grave, we bury that person. And early on, they took those graves and they covered them with not one stone, but a pile of stones. Serves a couple of really good purposes. You know where you put somebody if you want to go back and visit, memorialize. It shows where you put somebody so that when it comes time to bury someone else, you're not going to disturb the folks that are already there. And that pile of stones over the freshly turned earth of that new grave kept wild animals from getting in there and disturbing the body. The archaeological and anthropological record dating back 50,000 years and more continuously shows that different places, different points in times, different cultures and civilizations believed in the idea of something more after this, another world, another life that we go to after death. And we know that by those types of archaeological digs. This is a very simple grave. There's my occupant, and he's got a couple of things in there with him. They look like pottery vessels. They were put there for some purpose. They might be vessels that are needed in the next world. They might contain food or beads or herbs or oils, something that the occupant needs in the next world based on the belief system. These pointy things right here, aren't those just big old gravestones? Right? They mark the spot where Pharaoh is buried, and they contain wonderful things that Pharaoh needs for the next world. As you know, if you have seen me before, I can talk about this forever. So I have no trouble covering 50,000 years worth of history, but we're going to condense it down because we've only got a limited amount of time. And we're going to start at the good stuff. So we're going to walk through the three major eras of burial ground and cemetery and tombstone development. There is a difference between a burial ground and a cemetery, and I'm going to show you that today. So we're going to start with the colonial burial grounds of the first settlement through the 1700s. We're going to take a peek inside the rural garden movement of the 19th century, and we're also going to go into the modern cemeteries and look at the tombstones of the 20th and the 21st centuries. So I'll remind you when we get there, but I said in the opening, I came to town just a couple of weeks ago. I had promised Myra that I would have these beautiful spring pictures with blue skies and all the trees in bloom, and it was going to be so great because we talked about this. We made this program date last August. And I was like, no problem, I'll get out and we'll make beautiful pictures. The day I came down, about the mid to end of March, when the snow was finally gone, it was cold and rainy, and I was really struggling that day. I was like, don't be a baby. You need to go out there and do this work. And I was like, no, I promised beautiful pictures. So I came down, decided not to do it. I skipped that day, and I came back just about 2.5 weeks ago, on a beautiful spring day with lots of blue sky, lots of beautiful trees and flowers in bloom. And I visited all your cemeteries in town, and I took pictures. That includes your modern cemeteries. So when we get to that section, you may see someone you know. I have done my best to hide names and preserve identities, but if you know a stone, you know a stone. So somebody may pop up here that you know. Don't freak out. It's a little surprising to be in a public program and see a friend or relative's tombstone as part of a public presentation. Know that I am not trying to pick out anybody and say this is a good example, this is not a good example. What I'm doing is using the modern stones and the imagery that I find on them here in Braintree to illustrate who we are as modern people and what we want to say about ourselves and who we were by leaving information on our tombstones. The same way I use the colonials and the Victorians, their tombstones and their images and messages to talk about who they were at their particular point in time. Braintree, established 1640 from Boston. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 burial grounds and cemeteries in your historic record. I will be honest and tell you, this first Braintree first burial ground is in the record off of Plain Street. I couldn't find it. What else? I was able to visit everybody else. I believe that perhaps this did exist and is now gone for whatever reasons, because they do. We'll talk about how they move around, how they change. Elm Street is listed in the historic record as the first parish of the 2nd precinct. So I don't know how that works around here. Maybe you guys had some information or knowledge about what was called the first burial ground in 1711. But Elm Street and First Burial are pretty close in date, so they would look alike. If I had been able to find the first burial ground, they should look alike. So when you look at my slides, below, somewhere on the screen, it's going to say what we're looking at. So here we're looking at a colonial landscape, and it will also say where it's from. So if it's from Braintree, it will have the name of the cemetery underneath it. So this is the Elm Street Cemetery. Over time, we rename them from Old Burial Ground, Old Burying Place. Everybody often will take on that term of cemetery, because today we use those terms very interchangeably, but there was a definite distinction between them. And in the colonial period, these spaces are burial grounds, burying points, burial hill, old burial ground, but they're not cemeteries yet. So this is where I got really happy. This is one of my favorites. Just simply because you've got so much good stuff in there. I took about 150 pictures just in this burial ground, and I was rushing because I was running out of daylight. So when you see these spaces, these colonial spaces, know what you're looking at has absolutely changed over time. These spaces are typically in the center of town, or the original center of town. As town grows and changes, as we put up buildings and walls and roads, it eats into this space. Groundskeeping affects this space. Sanitation can affect this space. General aesthetics over time will affect the look of this space. Things get changed around, which is sort of counterintuitive with the way we view these spaces and historic preservation today. So one of the things from all of those changes that leaves a mark on the landscape that's a good visual cue for you as a visitor is, I got nice, neat rows, right? They look like the chairs and tables in the room. Organized, easy on the eye, easy to traverse, easy to keep the grounds. As further proof, when I was around town, I wanted to include this stuff to show you just extra information, extra proof, extra stuff for your brain and your eyes when you're out there to look for changes on the landscape and losses over time. So this is Dyer. This is the Dyer burial ground. This place needs love. It definitely needs love. But I've got all of these stones. I've got open space back here. And really, if we just jump back real quick, I got a lot of open space around here in Elm Street as well. Know that what you're looking at, you see X number of stones. There were probably more stones earlier in time that fall, go missing, get eaten up by trees and bushes and moved around. They fall down. A lot of times when they do fall down, there they stay. And over time, they just sink into the ground. They get covered over with grass, and they're gone visually from the landscape, but they may still be there. Rough stones as gravestones. So early on, from first settlement until about the mid to last portion of the 1600s, the organized burial ground that I just showed you didn't really exist. They were places to bury people, but if they're using markers at all, they're using rough stone that's readily available. Maybe it's got some information on it, initials, dates, very, very simple. Early on, we may also have used wooden markers, but those would be lost over time to decay. So when you're out and about in the graveyards, keep your eyes open, because you may walk by stones that might actually be tombstones, and they look just like the regular rough boulders that we have all over the place in New England. These are what we're used to seeing when we talk about a colonial burial ground. So gravestones have parts just like anything else. I got a shoulder over here. He's missing a little bit. This lunette up here is called the tympanum, where the art is contained. And then I've got another shoulder here. Below the art is my biographical information. Names, dates, ages, maybe relationships, maybe where they're from. If we're lucky, maybe how they died. We get some good direct information off the faces of the stones. In New England, particularly Massachusetts, we have a lot of slate gravestones, and we have sandstone as well. So if you took Massachusetts and you split it in half from maybe a little bit west of Worcester, call it the Brookfields, if you know where the Brookfields are, there be dragons. From just a little bit west of Worcester to the sea, to you guys out here to the sea. Dominant locally available material is slate. From about a little west of Worcester out to the edge of Massachusetts and down into Connecticut, locally available material is typically sandstone out of the Connecticut River Valley. They're going to be using building materials and tombstone materials that are locally available, because it's an arduous task to go get it out of the ground, move it to where you need it before you can even start working it. Gravestones originally had two parts, headstones, and these little guys back here are footstones. And the people of the time, very religious, very superstitious, really following the Bible to the letter. And this is the idea that they're called headstones and footstones. They're also called New England bedboards, a lesser used term, but another term used for them. And it is that idea of your bed for eternity. So if you bury Father and he's 6 feet tall, there'll be a 6-foot spread between his headstone and his footstone. If you bury Mother next to him and she's 5 feet tall, there would be a 5-foot spread between her headstone and footstone. Now I know this is a pop quiz, but a lot of you have been in the room already, so you might know the answer. So taking that idea about spacing your headstones and footstones according to person size, we can assume from this picture that everybody was all the same height. Right? Everybody that's been here at any of my presentations before are like, we're not falling for that. This is the right amount of room for the lawnmower to go through, isn't it? So if we're lucky, those footstones get pushed out and they create their own row. If we're lucky, they get tucked up behind the parent stone. And if we're not so lucky, off they go. And they can end up in all kinds of places. I showed us a picture a couple of slides ago, a bunch of stuff stacked up in a corner. I have seen them in walkways and windowsills and on the roof and in the stone walls and all over the place. Our concept or our idea of historic preservation, the way we think of it now, is a very much a 20th century idea. The idea of preserving and putting it, saving it, and even putting it back the way it used to be. Really started in the 1960s with the destruction of Penn Station in New York, and they went, oh well, maybe we shouldn't have done that. So that really kind of kicked off the idea of historic preservation and protecting things better than we had previously. Even the way these tombstones are organized in the ground in the colonial period is important. It has meaning. So there's a term up there that says east-west axis orientation. And all that is just a fancy way to say one side faces to the west, one side faces to the east. So what we're looking at here, and I did that wrong. So this is actually Elm Street. Because this is your old burial ground, I saved this one for last, the day I came out to look around, because my hope was that the orientation was still correct, which I got lucky, it was. So what we're looking at is the back of the stones here. The writing is on the other side, back here. The bodies are buried behind the stones, ideally. The writing is facing west, the bodies are facing east. On Judgment Day, the Archangel Gabriel is going to come from the east, sounding his trumpet, calling for Judgment Day and the idea of resurrection, and all the dead are going to sit up in their graves facing east to meet their Maker. This is an important call. You don't want to miss this call. Remember, I said they were religious, superstitious, following the Bible to the letter. Even the way you're buried in the ground is important so that when that trumpet sounds, you can sit up and hopefully get rewarded for the hard work that you did while you were here. Going to this space in the afternoon, depending on the time of year, is going to be the optimal time for taking pictures and really being able to see and read the stones, because if they haven't all been moved around, and you can see they've been moved because we've got all those nice rows, but they're still maintaining an orientation. I often get asked, where are the bodies? And my answer is, could be a really good question. We're more likely to orient the stones. So in the afternoon, the sun is going to be on the faces of those stones and really illuminate the art and the writing. Great picture taking, great way to see what's really on there. Sometimes I get foiled. And actually, you guys aren't far from Dedham. I got foiled one day in Dedham. I saved the old space for the end of the day. And I got there and everybody was backlit because they'd all been turned. So the writing was facing not even truly east. And I stood there going, well, now I'm not going to get any decent pictures. And why did you guys turn them this way? A church had been built in the 19th century, on the late 19th century, sort of on the edge of the burial ground. And I have no proof, but my deduction is those stones were all turned and possibly even moved for the building of the church, but also to face the church. So sometimes you get them still facing west, sometimes not so much. So I told you, colonial gravestone symbols, they're Christian-based iconography in their imagery and ideology in their meanings and their purpose. This is over at Elm, this is over at Dyer. This winged skull, this skull symbol is called the death's head. It's one of the earliest symbols used on colonial New England tombstones. It shows up around the late 1600s, post 1650, 1660, but firmly around the last quarter, we really see that as a dominant symbol. And it is meant to give you the idea of the idea of being human. You have one immortal soul. Your job is to take care of that soul by doing good work that you'll be rewarded on in the next world. This is the world of all the pain and suffering, living day to day, just trying to survive. So you need to remember, very religious, very superstitious, following the Bible to the letter. You need to remember all of that stuff, apply it to your daily deeds to protect or to empower that immortal soul for favorable judgment on Judgment Day. So early on, very literal, we call it, right now we would consider this a very primitive or even a sort of gruesome image to put on a tombstone, but it was completely easily understood by the folks of the time. We use the bones to signal the idea of being human, that when you're dead, all that's left is the bones. And at the time, because they're very religious and following the Bible to the letter, the idea of carving something into stone that looked human or angelic would have been considered a graven image and would have been sacrilegious. So early on, we used the bones to give a very literal imagery and message of the idea of being human. As we move into the 1700s, in the 1720s, 1730s, it's called the Great Awakening, and there is a backlash against that high religiosity, that idea that every little misstep is going to lead to eternal damnation. But we still have to be mindful of our behavior and its effect on the immortal soul. So they loosen up a little bit, and that soul, that winged skull, is allowed to grow some skin and take on a human or angelic look without running the risk of being a graven image. It means the same thing. It is just the more modern image, modern message for the time. So here are but a very few of the winged skulls, the death's heads that I found over in Elm. They are funny, they are cute, they are magnificent. And again, just but a very few. They all can look different from each other based on the carver, but they all have the same meaning. And they would have been easily understood by the folks passing by. These spaces are typically in the middle of town. So as you're going through on your normal daily routine, thinking about the details of your tasks and your work, these things are peeking out at you from the graveyard to remind you about your mortality and that your morality affects the destination of that immortal soul. And we do it with pictures like this to catch the people's attention that can read and write, but who don't always stop and read the written messages. But we also need to be able to get that message quickly and efficiently to the folks who cannot read and write. So it's a visual cue to get you to check your behavior. And certainly, look at all these handsomes. These are all from Elm. I think he might be my favorite. And he's right on the shoulder, too. So these images are in the tympanum, but also keep looking all over the stones because you never really know where you're going to find those kind of images. Don't let anybody tell you that this is the individual, that that's what the people in these spots look like. That this is not what the occupant of that grave or that tombstone stands for. It's easy to want to put those two together, but it is the idea of being human. Carvers carved often the same imagery and same styles over and over. Some may evolve over time and change their style. Carvers had apprentices that took their training and cues from the masters, but it is not the idea of the individual. And you can really see that when you're out in the colonial burial grounds because you will see these types of styles over and over. And unless everybody was cloning back then, we can assume that it helps reinforce that idea that these are not the individuals that occupy those graves. Souls don't have to have wings to be the idea of being human. Look at these fabulous faces. Can't you just hear her? She's like, dead, damn it. You've got two sets of carvers down here working similar styles with these kind of images. The Pratts and the News, NEW families. And they work down this way, and I see a lot of really great imagery, a lot of it down here in your area, all along the South Coast. And I often find some pieces that have traveled outside of the area as well. I want you to make note of the size of that tombstone. See that tree? So I'm 5 feet tall, and that stone is taller than me. It's a massive, massive piece of slate. Look at these guys. So this is the geek out part that I told you about. This is one. There's going to be a couple coming up that were really, really special. These two right here, I've got more than just a head, right? I got a whole being, and I got a bust up here. Do you see that thing in his hand right there? So he's a lieutenant. I can't tell you what it is. I mean, on first blush, it looks like a spear. I don't know. For a second, I thought it was a flag because of this up here. But also, you see these other wavy lines behind him. So I don't think it's meant to be a flag. I don't know. I'd have to do some reading and see if this stone has been written about in a scholarly fashion and any kind of idea about what that image is, what might have been posited. And I almost missed it with this guy. There he is. There's the wavies, but see the sun right there? I almost missed it. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Definitely unusual examples from those carvers. There are other symbols besides these souls. We have stars. Stars are guiding lights. They're called hexafoils, 6-pointed, sometimes 8-pointed, but hex is 6. Stars are guiding lights. They're the first thing to come in the night sky and the last thing to disappear into the sky at dawn. They're also really easy to carve, and they're great space fillers. So remember, we might have meaning, but we also might have artistic influence as well as a way of filling out a stone. This is not you, but I wanted to use this. Nothing says I'm dead like a gravestone with caskets on it. Those are they're called toe pinchers. These three down here are not you, but I wanted you to see them because they're from one of my last programs and I really enjoyed them. Do you see the heart there around the name? The heart was considered the seat of the soul. And actually, we were talking about Hingham earlier. If you go just next door, right? A lot of their winged souls have little hearts where their mouths are. And it's a particular carver, and that was sort of one of his signature styles. And remember, carvers copy each other, so carver identification is a whole nother program. But the heart was considered the seat of the soul. This might allude to that idea, but it is also just a really beautiful design element. We get crossed bones, we get skulls and crossed bones. That's an easily understood symbol that we still use today. We recognize it, we use it for things to denote danger, so poison or maybe high voltage. Very easily understood and yet a very old symbol. This is you guys up here. This is Elm Street. He's handsome, isn't he? He's just a cutie. Look over his head. A little tiny hourglass. Again, I almost missed it. Sometimes it's so bright when you're out there, you miss a lot of the details until you come and sit with the photos. The idea with the hourglass is everyone's born with one. You've got a certain amount of sand. You don't know how much sand you have, and that glass could run out at any moment. You are to make use of every grain of sand you have until it runs. We get Latin on the stones. Memento mori. This is not Braintree. That doesn't mean you don't have them. There was a lot of biological growth on some of the stones in Elm Street, so it's very possible that underneath those lichens and mosses, you may have some stones that have this Latin phrase, memento mori. It means think on death, remember your mortality. So we've got Latin on the stones, we've got written words on the stones, we have pictures on the stones. We gotta make sure we get everybody. Latin was also a language of early Christianity, so we've got it all together. This stone is somewhere in the wilds of Connecticut that I couldn't find again if I tried. I saw this a long, long time ago. But I use it because it's got this very fancy Latin phrase across the top of it, and that's great. But in the 21st century, I don't need to know Latin to understand the picture language going on this stone. This is a tree. You're the tree. Human lives are like trees. They have a definite beginning, they have a definite end, and that life is fragile and can be interrupted at any time. So you're the tree, and you got up today and you thought you were going to have a normal day. You're going about your business, and all of a sudden your maker comes out of the clouds with his hatchet and he fells your tree. Hope you were ready. You didn't know it was coming. You can't do anything to stop it. And once it's done, that's it. Every opportunity you've had to do the good work for the care and feeding of that immortal soul is done. It's all that you've got. And again, it is that idea that interruption, that end of life is inevitable and absolutely around the corner at any moment. But not to worry, death is not a permanent condition. Lightly scribed across the top of this stone out in the sort of Western Mass area reads, "The grave is God's hiding place." Grave is kind of like God's waiting room. They're just hanging out and waiting for something very specific. This is what we're waiting for. Resurrection, the idea of Gabriel coming from the east, blowing the trumpet, sounding the call to Judgment Day, and the idea of all the dead being resurrected, redeemed, hopefully, redeemed of your sins, and again, hopefully, ascending to the next world. This was the hard world where you spent, hard life where you spent every moment just trying to survive. All that labor is over. You can rest and go on to the glory of the next world. This handsome devil right here is my boyfriend. He is death. He is also mortality. They have a symbiotic relationship. And the banner reads, "All must submit to the King of Terrors." Death was known as the king of all terrors, and all must submit. Nobody gets out of here alive. And there was a famous rock star that said that in the 60s. Well, guess what? They knew that in 1660, in 1760. But don't worry, keep reading. Through Christ, we conquer, rise, and reign forever. The promise that there is something more after this. As we come to the end of the 1700s, there's a lot of change going on. We decide to form a new nation. We say, thanks, Mr. King, it's been great, but we're breaking off onto our own, and we have a revolution. And the founding fathers that are putting together this new nation, they're looking for ideology and representation of who are we, what do we in this new nation stand for. So they look at the very ancient and the very successful civilizations of the Greeks and the Romans, who were the founders of the concepts of democracy and the republic, the idea of the people governing themselves. And they use that idea. While they're doing that, there's also real-time archaeology going on in those places. Greece, Italy, certainly all across Europe to the far reaches of the Roman outposts across the continent. There's excavation going on in Pompeii in the 1790s, where Pompeii is coming to light for the first time since the volcano erupted in 79 AD. You've got Napoleon is in Egypt, bringing stuff home. His artists are making pictures of another classic civilization. You're able to take the grand tour. You're able to get on a boat and go across the ocean if you've got the means to go see these ancient civilizations coming up out of the ground. And all of this, those civilizations are the classics, right? So when they come up and they start influencing the modern world of the time, we adopt it into the land of the living, and we call it neoclassicism. And it affects things like our architecture, our furniture, our style of dress in the land of the living, but it also affects what goes on in the imagery in the land of the dead. And one of the big things that translates from the ancient civilization to the land of the living and then onward to the land of the dead is the idea of the urn. So this is a cinerary urn. It they were coming out of the ground from these excavations, and they're a perfect modern symbol for the time to show mortality and the idea of both cremation, because cremation has been practiced for thousands of years, and also the idea of the vessel that carries the body to the next world. So it becomes a very dominant symbol. We also get trees again, and this is a specific tree. This is a weeping willow, and by virtue of its name and the way it looks, it's a perfect modern symbol of the time for weeping and sorrow and mourning. And we talked about the tree being the idea of like a human life. I've got a cut branch there. Sometimes I see them split, and very severely split, and maybe even new growth coming from that split. The idea of the end of this life, but the promise of a new life. I see them by themselves, and I see them together. And firmly as we move into the 1800s, this becomes the dominant symbol. As we went with those winged skulls and those winged souls, they will overlap all the time. You can't say the winged skull stopped being used in 1736. It continued on. The winged soul would show up on stones that are before the 1720s and 30s. You don't always get a tombstone when you die. The carvers are also not sitting around waiting for you to show up and say, I need a gravestone. So they're making stones, and then you purchase the stone with whatever imagery you choose, and then you pay to have it lettered. This is the same thing. So I will say, and was it here? It might even have been here that I found one with a late or an early 1800 date with a winged soul on it. And remember, I know how funny this is going to sound, but you know, old stock, old new stock, the idea that, well, they carved this and maybe somebody didn't pick it up, or, you know, it's got a boo-boo on it or whatever, and we can fix it, and hey, I'll give you a discount. So take all of that stuff into consideration when it comes to dating imagery on stones. They definitely have their particular time periods, and they will overlap. This becomes the dominant symbol as we move into the 1800s. And again, these are from Elm Street and Plain Street here in town. Phase 2, this looks really different, doesn't it? This is Mount Auburn Cemetery. Who's been here? Oh, good job. The rest of you will go this afternoon. It's beautiful out. It's a great day to go to the cemetery. So this is the first time in this country that a place where we bury the dead is called a cemetery. And even the word cemetery is a derivative of a Greek word that means sleeping place or dormitory, and really reflects the idea of the time about how we die. We pass away, we go to the summer land, we fall asleep, no more axes, no more food for the worms, all that primitive ideas, that's just barbaric, and that is not who we are as we come into the 1800s. Mount Auburn Cemetery was established in 1831 by the Massachusetts Horticultural Society in Cambridge, which, as a note, you have a founder of the Mass Horticultural Society over in your Elm Street Cemetery. Very impressive stone, I might add. And it seems odd that a horticultural society is going to be making a cemetery. But what they're doing when they first developed Mount Auburn is they're taking their cues from places like the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris that is landscaped. They're also taking their cues from the English garden movement that's popular at the time. So this landscape transforms from that sort of stark colonial look to more park-like. Green grass, rolling hills, trees, pathways to walk. The monuments are different shapes and sizes, they're different materials. This represents who we are as modern people, not only how we live, but how we die. There's the writers of the time, Hawthorne, Thoreau, Byron. They are writing about nature and communing with nature. Thoreau is literally writing about preserving nature. We've got the spiritualists and the transcendentalists that believe in the spirit world and the veil between this world and the next being very thin, and the idea of being able to sort of stay in touch with your deceased through spiritualism and mediumship. We're using our Ouija boards, we're having our seances. When this space comes in, when it opens in 1831, it is a tourist attraction, exactly the same way as it is today, because it is the first public park. And they say that Frederick Olmsted took his cues for places like the Emerald Necklace and Central Park on the idea of Mount Auburn. This is open green space 4 miles outside of dirty downtown 19th century industrialized Boston. So we've made a transition from the 16 and 1700s from being agrarian to being an industrialized nation. The factories that crop up are giving us work. They're making life easier by their mechanizations, making goods easier to achieve. All of this comes together to make us modern people of the 19th century and modern dead people over the 19th century as well. So when Mount Auburn kicks off in 1831, everybody starts doing it. Here's your rural landscape over in Pond Cemetery here in town. I love the idea that you've got this lake pond, and on one side there's Lakeside Cemetery, and on the other side is Pond Cemetery. And even if you go into Elm Street, over here is your colonial, and then over on the other side it looks a lot different with 19th century marble markers and even granite markers as well. So everybody's doing it. And in these rural landscapes, in these newfangled cemeteries, for the first time, we have the ability to purchase a family plot. That's a nice large one. And we might do things like put a foundation down. So here, we've put stonework, we've put curbing or coping all around the edges to just say, this is my plot of land. This is my home away from home. A vacation home, if you will. But it looks like home. We all live together in the land of the living, one by one. Family members die, and they go to the family plot where they'll all be reunited. We have a front door that you walk through, walk up the stairs, and you walk through into that space that is your home. And the idea of this family plot, everybody's doing it. It's the modern thing to do. So I have a family plot, some back there, another one over there. It becomes a neighborhood. These cemeteries of the 19th century are very social spaces. They're coming in here to commune with nature. They're coming to commune with the dead. They're coming in here to picnic. They're coming in to socialize with living friends and family that are in here doing the same things, including picnicking and caring for their lots and stones. This gate says the French family cemetery. So they have a fencing around it, around the burial lot, and a gate with the name of the family. So it's kind of like the name and number on the mailbox, right? This is where we are. This is where we live. I need you to know about these because I found them around town, both on Plain Street and in Elm Street cemeteries. These are hill tombs. So they are tombs built into a hill. And you can see, here's the hill on this side, you can see the top of it behind this one. There is a facade that's built into the hill with a door. You open the door. Typically, you may walk straight in, or maybe you go down a couple of stairs to get in through the door. And underneath this earth is typically a barrel vault. This one looks square, but I think it's also been changed over time. But they're either square or a barrel vault. They can be brick, they can be stone, and you walk into that room just like you walk into that chamber the same way you walked through the door over here. And This one is over on Plain Street. It's got a family name over the door here. There's a plaque here about the so-and-so family tomb. This has got a wooden door. These have been sealed, as you can see. And we're going to make sure you're not going to get that door open. That wooden door, it's got a little bit of space between the wood. So nosy Gravestone girls get their faces right up in there with their cameras. And we take pictures inside so you can see the stonework of the walls from the inside. There's nobody in here. There's a bunch of trash in here. Until these things are closed up, people are going in and out. I can tell you on a 103-degree July day, those are very nice, cool spaces. But remember, animals get in there and live, so if you're going to do any exploring, even putting your face up to the door, you can end up with a face full of cobwebs, so be careful. Sometimes they are sealed with remains inside. Sometimes they are emptied and the bodies are put elsewhere. Sometimes the families will close them up and seal them permanently. Sometimes if there's no family, whoever oversees the burial ground may often seal them up. Going to keep nosy bodies like me and everybody else out of them. And also without maintenance, they can become unstable over time. So I also don't even recommend walking on the top of them because you just never know. You want a surprise? You want to fall through? There's a good surprise for you. So I thought this was so great. There's a door that's been put up on granite, and it's got a family name on it, and I believe a date as well. So this door came from some type of tomb looking like this, either freestanding or a hill tomb like this that no longer exists for whatever reason, but the door was salvaged. I also need you to know about this. This is in Elm Street. This is called a box tomb. So it is the idea of way back when in the churches, you could be entombed inside the church. That's typically reserved for the clergy and the glitterati that patronized and basically bought their way in. The rest of you riffraff outside. The idea of this box tomb, and also sometimes table stones, which are what they sound like, they're a slab on legs that look like a table. When I find them on the grounds of our cemeteries and burial grounds, they are very typically for the clergy or important founding fathers that I might see, I don't know, names around the city, on streets, on libraries, like, I don't know, Thayer maybe. You know, and it's the idea of more, I hate to call them more important, but more influential people that would be perhaps at one time been buried in the church, in the crypt underneath the altar. So this is that idea of the altar. Don't let anybody tell you there's a body in here. There's not. Again, it's really easy to go, hey, it's a box. They must be in the box. These are often hollow, just four sides and a top. They might have a stone or brick structure that then the finished stone is put on. If you go, a good example I can think of is up in Salem at the Charter Street Burial Ground. There's a bunch of boxes like these, a bunch of box tombs that actually have doors on them, and they function the same way as a hill tomb. The doors have been sealed, but you would have gone in the door and down the stairs into actually an underground chamber. Softer symbols, no more hatchets, no more bad, awful, terrible stuff, easy transitions. The angels come and carry you from your bed and make that transition to the next world. Much softer symbols, doves, certainly a symbol of peace, also the Holy Spirit, the idea wreaths, the idea of the circle, no beginning, no end. Books, sometimes they could be the Bible, they might be the idea of the book of life, they might be inscribed on the top with phrases or names. This one, I'm going to go with Bible because it's for a reverend. The idea, this is such a lovely, see that finger right there holding the place in the book? It looks like it had an inscription, maybe a name. The idea of that hand, it is marking the spot. You'll also often see them pointing to the sky, and the idea of the way to go, the idea of leaving this world and going to the next. That hand that we see, particularly pointing, is the idea, it is no different than the winged skull, that death's head that we saw on the colonials. It is just the more modern symbol for the time because it points the way, the promise of another world after this. And again, softer sentiments like that, the idea that we shall meet her there, there's more after this, we'll all be reunited. I know that that looks like a seal, but it's not. It's a poor little lamb. And all of these, this one, and particularly this one with his little statue on the top, shows the idea of marble. So slate and sandstone we talked about for the colonial period. When we move to the 19th century, we've got waterways, we've got railroads, we even have the ability to have ocean liners go from here to places like Carrara, Italy, and get marble out of the ground and bring it back. So now we can get not just building material, but tombstone material from farther away. We have more access to it. So we choose marble to be the new symbol or the new material for these newfangled cemeteries. And even by virtue of what it looks like, it's symbolic. It's pure, it's white, so it's symbolic of purity in heaven, and it glows on the landscape. The problem with marble is that it weathers, it's very easily weathered by wind and rain. Like that poor little guy up there. At one point, that guy had a face, and he had ears, and he might even have had little curly cues to show the wool of the lamb. But yeah, he's been eroded away, and he's out there. You know, he's not protected by anything. So he's been out there since the 1800s, and worse for wear. So once the erosion has happened, you can't bring this stuff back without recutting it, which we're going to frown upon. But also, marble is very porous, so it absorbs the pollutants in the air and becomes dirty and discolored like this. So it is no longer that nice white marble. And some just wear better than others. It is possible to clean marble, which you don't do unless you know what you're doing, but it is possible to restore these to a more bright white color. All local pond, Elm and Lakeside. Nods to nature. There's a whole language of flowers in the 19th century and trees. Again, it translates here. So that lamb we saw was typical typically used for children. The idea of innocence and purity. There's my dove again. It says sleeps here, so there's that softer symbol. There's the dove over some ivy. Ivy is very prolific, very far-reaching. I've got, see all that wear away there? That used to have petals and be much more sharp and detailed. Those are blooms. So we have flowers the same way we have trees. The idea of the flower that starts as the bud, blooms, and then the bloom fades. We often get breaks in the stems as well. We get different types of flowers, and for the language of flowers in the 19th century, so many flowers had specific symbolic meanings. See that hand reaching down out of the clouds, but now instead of a hatchet, it's picking the flower. This is a stone for a baby. The idea that flower that never gets to bloom, and the idea of the life being nipped in the bud. I've got more floral here over the cross, which is a symbol of faith and a wonderful sentiment. Death, thou art but another birth freeing the spirits from the clogs of earth, the idea of being set free. And even here, this is over at Pond, even the entryway, the original entryway, wrought iron over the stairs, has a little acorn right up there. A beautiful 19th century addition. I've told you to look at the symbols, the orientation, the materials, everything. The imagery. Don't forget to look down when you're out there. Often, particularly on the 19th century stones, you may find signatures. In the 19th century, this is more of an advertisement. It's more of a calling card if you're strolling through the cemetery, because that's what we all did in the 19th century. And you see a stone, you're like, oh, hey, I like that one. Oh, well, look, Gallagher made it. Or this one came from Quincy. Or this is the Tingley brothers. The Tingley brothers were out of Providence. Colonial era stones will occasionally be signed. They're few and far between. The ideology of the time said there is one maker and you ain't it. So to put your name to something as a maker would have been blasphemy. But come the 19th century, it's much more of an advertisement or a calling card. I need you to know about these because I found one in town. This is over at Pond. This is called a white bronze. This is the same stone, just it's same monument, different sides of it. It is the same marker. It's called white bronze. It's made by the Monumental Bronze Company in Bridgeport, Connecticut from about the mid-1800s to the 19-teens. A group of guys come together to form this company as in direct competition with the stone monument market. They want to do something new. They want to do something that's more customizable. They want to bring something that's price competitive and modern to the landscape. So they make this white bronze. It is neither white nor is it bronze. Kind of blue-gray. What they're doing here is capitalizing on the word bronze. So at the time, middle to end of the 1800s, bronze is a popular material, both in the land of the living and on the cemetery landscape. It is, it's a visual cue that says, we have money. So you would see them in the cemetery as bronze doors, bronze plaques, bronze statuary, bronze vases, because they're expensive. They got a lot of cachet, and they're also very modern. So the problem with bronze is that it needs maintenance. Bronze has copper in it, and the copper will oxidize and cause it to turn streaky black, white, green, from the elements, from the air and the water. It oxidizes and it changes color. So without maintenance, that beautiful bronze that you spent a lot of money on is going to look not so lovely in a short period of time. So Monumental Bronze Company said, well, we're going to one-up that. So they're cashing in on the idea that everybody understands that bronze is expensive and fancy and modern, and they call theirs white bronze to differentiate. And they say, it doesn't need maintenance. It's going to look as good in 100 years as it does the first day that it's put out on the cemetery landscape, because it's not actually bronze. It's zinc. Almost 100% pure zinc that is smelted at the foundries, poured into molds, and then the molded pieces are put together to make a monument. It's highly customizable. You don't go to the store for this. There's no showrooms. You see them on site in the cemetery. There's somebody there's a local representative for Monumental Bronze that has a design book and travels around door to door selling these and giving you the opportunity to not only purchase, but design your own. Very, very customizable, because you can pick anything you want out of the book, out of the design book, to create your own monument. When you see these on a landscape, you're one in town. Everybody go to Pond at some point, go visit this guy, go visit the Libbies, and just knock on it. Just rap on it a little bit. If somebody answers, run. But what's really most likely going to happen, it's going to return a hollow metallic sound. So it's metallic sound because of the zinc, but that hollow resonance because there's no internal armature. These are all pieces that are molded and then put together to make the object. Even once they're on the landscape, they are still customizable. The only thing that will come off are these plaques here. You see those little nuts and bolts there? They hold those molded plaques on. So those plaques are molded with letterings the same way we do typeset printing. So if you want to make changes later on, you make a plaque for the folks that you know are there, and then maybe you bury somebody later on, so you might leave one side with a design. You know, the one I showed you with the cross and the sentiment. You might replace that with another one, or you might leave a blank panel there that can be replaced with a freshly molded panel with your new information on it. If you're lucky, not so lucky for the monument, but if you're lucky and you come across one sometime that has this panel missing, again, nosy Gravestone Girls are going right in to see what's inside, which is often bugs and animals. But gingerly take a little peek in, don't stick your whole head in the hole, but you'll often see the numbering of the pieces on the inside of each panel that showed how the marker was to be assembled. This idea keeps going. Monumental bronze has different incarnations between first founding and into the 19-teens, when it basically goes out of business or changes itself over for the war effort. The foundry and the zinc materials are needed for the First World War effort. Third period, modern landscape. This is the part where I remind you in the next couple of slides, you may see somebody that you know. As we come through the 1800s, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Again, big doings, lots of changes, lots of forward momentum in manufacturing. We've got things as we come through and move into the 1900s. We've got railroads, westward expansion, telephone, telegraph, electric lights, plumbing, all kinds of stuff that make us a very modern civilization as we cruise into the 20th century. Two things happen in the last half to quarter of the 1800s. So with the Civil War, we start embalming our dead. It catches on. So people, to that point, people are dying at home. They get ill at home. They die at home. The wake is held in the house. Sometimes the funeral is held in the house. And what happens as we start moving to the end of the 1800s, that changes. And embalming is part of that. We give the job of caring for our deceased to somebody else. We give it to the funeral director, who takes the body from wherever we might have passed, and more likely to be some kind of facility rather than at home. Somebody else deals with the dying. Somebody else deals with the dead. And what happens is that we as modern people, we stop dealing with the idea of mortality and death because we're not as affected by it. We've given that job to somebody else. We have also got the rise of modern medicine. We understand how we get sick. We understand about germs and bacteria. We understand about hygiene and cleanliness. We understand how to store our food so it doesn't make us sick. We are making medical milestones, leaps and bounds. And really, as you go into the 20th century, it's faster and faster and faster. So let's just say, I usually put it at 100 years, or even if I'm generous, 150 years, how quickly medicine has moved to allow us to cheat death on a regular basis. My joke always is, I used to say in my presentations, you need a kidney? I can give you one. Because we had the technology to do that, right? You need a kidney today? You wait just another minute. You just wait a couple more years and they're just going to print you one. They're going to print you parts, no problem. It's modern medicine, it's modern technology. If you think about, I'm listening to a podcast about it now, in vitro fertilization, totally normal, right? Every day, normally done, women are freezing their eggs and planning for later, all that kind of stuff. Well, that was modern miracle in the late 1970s. Medicine has allowed us to cheat death on a regular basis. I also put forward my own completely my own idea. But I really think that part of the reason that the pandemic affected us so hard is because it was the first time since 1918 that there was disease that we didn't have medicine for. You couldn't take a pill, you couldn't get a shot, but look how fast medicine gave us a medical answer. Year and a half, maximum 18 months. So all of that comes together for us as modern people. Cheat death on a regular basis changes this landscape. These are places we stop going as often. Death is a conversation for the deep, dark back burner and the dark closet. And also, this landscape changes because we change from a society point of view. There's a backlash against all that Victoriana, that high over ornamentation, that high sentiment, that high sentimentality. We want to take a step back in the early 20th century, and we want to just relax from that frenetic period that was certainly marked by the end of the Victorian period. There's an arts and crafts movement that makes its way over here, the aesthetic movement. And in the land of the living, we simplify our houses, our architecture, our buildings, our architecture, our furniture, our clothes, our dress, our hair, our habits, everything. We return to a more simpler. This space will do the same thing. We're going to reclaim this space and make it a modern cemetery that's easier on the eyes, not that big, busy city of the Victorian landscape, but more pastoral, easier on the eye as we gaze across the landscape. And other things that affect this space, modern groundskeeping, we only have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of manpower and time to keep this space looking good. We have the ability through industrialization to be able to get granite out of the ground. Granite is molten from the molten core of the earth. It creates granite. There's a very hard stone. You're right next to Quincy. Go over and look at the Quincy Granite Museum. It's fantastic. They let you even split rocks with wedges and use the pneumatic tools. Those pneumatic tools, air-powered and water-powered tools of the industrial 1800s, particularly mid to late 1800s, allows us to harness this rock, not just, again, for great big important buildings, but for everyday buildings and for use in the cemetery as a modern material. So all of that comes together to make this landscape. And this is Blue Hill up here. Look how far back that reaches. It's just a perfect idea of the landscape and what that modern landscape looks like. This is Plain Street Cemetery. So it used to be I'd go into these spaces and I couldn't meet anybody the way I meet people when I go into the colonial burial grounds, when I go into the 19th century cemeteries, because the stones were pretty sparse for the most part. Name on the front, family name on the front, and maybe names and years, birth year, death year on the back, not a lot of other information. And what I found, and I kind of used the 1980s as a point where I see it change, we as modern people want to reclaim the narrative and talk about who we were. Damn it, foiled, because I wasn't looking. Forgot to tell you about this. Okay, forget that great segue. Because I wanted you to know about these, I forgot. I don't usually get these. This is over in Blue Hill. The idea, we talked about the hill tombs, right? This is the modern mausoleum. I don't actually know how modern that is. I think that might be early 20th century. It might be a little older than that. But it is the idea. So that hill tomb was the tomb built into the hill where you walk into the structure basically underground or under the earth. Mausolea are freestanding. So mausoleum, one. Mausolea, more than one. There's your vocabulary word for the day. And they are freestanding buildings. Very impressive freestanding building. And they do really create their own neighborhood as well. And they have front doors on them, and you can walk right up to the doors and many times peek in. I could not peek in here. All of these are covered up. It's very sad about that. But you can walk up to the doors and peek in, and you see things like this. The bodies are in here. They're in the building. They're in the vaults along the walls. So there's 4 on each side, so this sleeps 8. They will very often have a window, a stained glass window. They might have a religious image on it. It might have an art image, architectural. I've seen them where they have trees and flowers, so it gives the idea of looking out the window. You know, really home away from home, right? The families have the keys to the doors. They open up, go inside, might have kneelers like this, where you could do that memento mori thing, and we leave pictures, we leave flowers, we come here, we visit, and we remember. So did I get it right this time? I got it right this time. This was my great segue that I completely blew. I warned you there was a lot of content here. So that idea of the modern cemetery, we took back that narrative and we want to talk about who we were. And I can see you. I can see your faces. I can meet people that I existed contemporaneously with, but didn't have an opportunity to physically or literally meet at the time of their lives. So up here, this is a photo ceramic. It's a piece of ceramic with an emulsion process that puts a photo on it. So if you're old enough to remember film cameras, and then maybe old enough to remember taking that film to the photomat, or maybe taking photography in school and developing, it is the same idea. There's an emulsion process that develops the photo onto the ceramic. This is an etching. So a very popular material in the 20th and 21st centuries, and I really see it showing up around the 1980s, which is why I put my changeover line in that decade. It's black granite, and it really lends itself to putting pictures on it. So this is an etching. This is also an etching, and it is the idea of very talented people with diamond-tipped tools that etch the images into these black granite stones. This was something I found over in Blue Hill as part of the larger marker. There's a little niche here, and the family can come. I don't know if it's sealed or not. I've seen some that are and some that aren't. They can be locked or sealed, and the family can come and put their mementos in, put their pictures, you know, leave things graveside that you used to leave outside on the stone. Now you can put them in a little protective area and have even more personal pieces there. So I see what we did, not only who we were, but who we were, not just what we looked like, but what did we do? We were firemen, we served the community in the police, we served the community in the Navy. We were We will show our nationality. We're Swedish, Dutch, Irish. I had a hard time placing this one. I was like, is this a jockey or do we like to go to the racetrack? Doesn't make a difference. Somebody enjoyed the racetrack for some reason. And while it may seem odd to have photographs on the landscape in these cemeteries, this is a stone from over in Pond Cemetery for George that if you read his information, says that he died in Indiana from a railroad car crash. That bears looking up. But the reason I used it is for this. This may have had a photoceramic, or it is 1822. So remember, don't always get a gravestone when you die. This may have gone up around 1822. No photography until 1839. So if it went up between his death and 1839, it may have been a ceramic that had a painting on it of some kind of image. Maybe him, maybe something else. Maybe this stone goes up well after his death when we have photography, and this space held a photograph, whether it was a daguerreotype, an ambrotype, or a ferrotype. And often the shape and size of the opening may often give you an indication to what type of photo, and therefore help you place the time that it was made and put on the stone. So we want to talk about who we were, and we also want to talk about what we did while we were here. How did we enjoy ourselves? What was our, not only what was our profession, but what were our hobbies? What did we like to do? Well, we liked to ride motorcycles. We loved to sail. We loved lighthouses. I see a lot of lighthouses on stones in New England. So this one is done with sandblasting, like these over here. This is one of the etched ones. And a lot of times, and I find particularly with the etchings, if you know your lighthouses well enough, you can identify a specific lighthouse. You guys know Nubble Light up in Maine, up in York, Maine? You know how many times I see Nubble Light on people's tombstones? It's amazing. So we like lighthouses. We like lighthouses and sailing together. I see your pets. I see your pets all the time, particularly, well, dogs and cats, but I might just be looking for cats more because I'm a cat kid. Our hobbies, not only do we spend eternity riding our motorcycles, we spend eternity playing golf. Strawberries, I got nothing, but it doesn't matter. It's a neat symbol. Maybe they just like strawberries. Maybe strawberries have a particular important meaning for that person. And remember, you do your own stones, but also people do stones for their deceased. So they may put things on the stones that remind them of that individual. And here, I've got a photo ceramic of a couple, and it's got all this information about how they were soulmates and they did all their things together. And I don't even need to read all of that to know that they were lovebirds. You need to know about these because you have these here in town over at Blue Hill. This is a community mausoleum, community columbarium. So this is a bit older. This is new. I think they've added some new ones, but this is the idea of buying a spot. And for this, these are for the caskets. So the caskets go into the vaults horizontally like that. This is for cremains. So that is for bodies that have been cremated. These smaller niches hold the urns. You have the ability to buy a space. Sometimes they hold one, sometimes they'll hold two cremains. And then you can put names on the outside to indicate who's who. These are a way for the cemetery to make better use of their land, more use of their land, and certainly with the addition of new columbaria like that, you have the ability not only to add space on the landscape, but also make it affordable, because these niches are less expensive than full casketed lots for in-the-ground burials. We do a lot of things in these modern cemeteries. And I will say, I always hate doing this because I feel like I'm picking on us, but I'm one too. We do all kinds of stuff in the cemeteries, except here in New England. All of these things that I'm going to talk about, I have seen going on in other cemeteries all over the country. We do not do this stuff in New England. I think it's just because we're just as puritanical as when we got here 400 years ago. But again, Gravestone Girls are trying to fix that because cemeteries are fun. So more than just taking walking tours, we do all these kind of things and more. We keep bees on the landscape. Good for the bees, good for the flowers and trees. And I can promise you that cemetery honey is always sold out long before it leaves the hive. Everybody wants the cemetery honey. Gardening club, invite the community in to help you beautify the landscape. It's free work. It beautifies the landscape, and it is a way of getting the community involved. This is one of the ones that makes all my New Englanders gasp. Dog park. I know, stay with me. I know you're all clutching back there. But I use the example of Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C. They have, I don't even know what their acreage is, maybe relatively small, maybe 25, 35, 40 acres. They have a dog park. You pay a membership to have your dog. Each of your dogs you pay a membership fee for. And you pay to become a member of the dog park club, where you can bring your dog in and let him run off leash. There's little mini fire hydrants, there's bowls of water. You, of course, need to keep control of your animal. If you do not, they have no trouble booting you out of the club. You lose your money, and they don't care, because the waiting list to get into the dog park group at Congressional Cemetery is 2 to 3 year waiting list. Where on earth in Washington, D.C. are you going to find open green space to run your dog? Good for the cemetery, because it brings money to the cemetery. It brings responsible people. They're only going to take the responsible folks. And good for the community. Weddings and parties. I know any number of people that have gotten engaged, married, or had their weddings inside the cemeteries, whether it's on the grounds. Many of these 19th century cemeteries not only have beautiful grounds, but they have chapels that aren't just for funeral services. They can be used for things like weddings and parties. Dinner and a movie. Have dinner in the cemetery, watch a movie afterwards. Hollywood Cemetery in Los Angeles does movies on a very regular basis. They fill the place. And on Halloween, they show Night of the Living Dead. I want to go back to Congressional for just a second. As I continue on with all of these uses, again, the New Englanders are like, disrespectful, sacrilegious, don't do that, don't let the dogs pee on the stones. I get all of that. It can be managed, it can be maintained. And the man that runs Congressional, I love his response when he is asked, how can you do that? How can you hold activities like that at the cemetery? He says, well, if you'll write me a check for $3,000 to mow the lawn this week, I will happily skip a movie night. Grass ain't gonna grow itself, and you're inviting the community in to enjoy these spaces. And certainly enjoy it with yoga. You think of a more peaceful place to do yoga. Maybe the 5Kers today are running in the cemetery. I'd love to see that. Stargazing, the cemetery invites you in to come look at the night sky amongst the tombstones and tell you about astronomy. Book clubs and death cafes, we get together to talk about common subjects like death and mourning, and do it in an open even if you want to be anonymous, but to do it in an open way, bringing that subject back to the forefront and out of the shadows. It's inevitable, inescapable. We might as well talk about it. It makes it easier to deal with when the time comes. This is me in my natural habitat. So this is me in my booth at the Market of the Macabre in Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. Do you see those tombstones? We are literally amongst the tombstones. They have about 60 vendors, happens once a year in September. Very civilized, 12 to 5 o'clock. You don't have to get up too early. It is a gorgeous 19th century Victorian cemetery right along the Schuylkill River, up on a hill in Philadelphia. They have vendors, they have food trucks, they have a gift shop that they sell things, they're giving walking tours, they're getting memberships from the visitors, they're getting donations from the visitors, they get the money that the food trucks and the vendors have to pay to be there. They charge at the gate $5 to $10 a head, $5 if you order your tickets early, 10 day of. They get almost 3,000 people through the gate in one day. Do the math. That money goes directly to the cemetery, and it goes right back into the cemetery to keep the grounds, do preservation work, do more education work. Keeping the living in these spaces is good for us because it's enjoyable, it's educational, you're getting outside, you're watching the birds, your vitamin D, all that good stuff. But it's good for the dead as well, because the more living boots on the ground in these spaces, the safer they are for the monuments and the eternal residents therein. Technology, we're modern people, right? Mobile apps, there's an app for that. Can't make it to the cemetery walking tour at 12 o'clock at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning because you're running a 5K? Download the app, take the tour on your own time. Take the tour without leaving the house. Those apps often not only have the information that you would get if you were on the walking tour, but allows you to delve deeper into information that you have time to consume that they may not be able to fit in when they're giving physical tours of the area. Y'all know what this is. Before the pandemic, I had to explain to people what this was. That's a QR code. It's a type of UPC code. The idea is, it's been enlarged for your viewing pleasure. It is life-size right there in the lower left. It's about 1 inch in diameter. It's made by the Memory Medallion Company in Pennsylvania that holds the US patent for using QR technology for memorialization. So you purchase your memory medallion, you have it installed on your stone, and some nosy gravestone girl or other visitor to the cemetery with a cell phone scans your QR code and it's brought to your personal website. 999 spaces to do anything you want with it. Post your pictures, post your writings, post your achievements, post your pets' pictures. This is Mrs. Sarah Buchanan. She is the spokesmodel that comes up when we scan that memory medallion QR. And we learn a bunch of stuff from her that's written on her memory medallion site. But there's also, so in her life, she was known for her famous family caramel recipe. There is a 14-minute video on her memory medallion website of her in the kitchen with her adult son, and she's bossing him around to show us how to make the famous family caramel recipe. So I always tell everybody, I can go to the cemetery and I can meet people, I can look at art, I can get messages, I can commune with the spirits and watch the birds and all of that, and I can learn how to cook. I gave this presentation a while ago to the New England Cemetery Association for their annual meeting. I got 100 cemeterians in the room. Everybody from the guys that dig the graves to those that sell the graves and the owners of the cemeteries and everybody in between. And I was like, you guys are my test market. Tell me by a show of hands, how many of you have memory medallions in your cemetery? Remember, this is Massachusetts. How many you think I got? How many hands you think I got?
None.
Zip. Again, just as puritanical as we were when we got here 400 years ago. But I promise you that it is happening outside of the New England area, because memory medallion's been in business for probably 30 years or more. And actually that memory medallion itself is its second generation technology. So it's keeping up with modern times. If it wasn't being used somewhere, that company would cease to exist. I warned you how long I could talk about this. I have gone over. I often do. You may know if you've been here before, or if you just sat here for the last hour and 40 minutes. Hour and 40 minutes. My job, that I love so dearly, is to show you that these places are fun. They are the land of the dead, but they're also for the living. They are educational, they're entertaining, they're peaceful, they're a way to get out into nature. They are free living art museums. They are time travel portals. They're a place to learn. They're a valuable resource for information. And I can't make this stuff up. This is over in Lakeside. That's Lakeside, and that's Pond. Right there, next to somebody's stone, very decorated. It was like, thanks for coming. Well, that's fabulous. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me in the cemetery. Thank you to Myra, thank you to the library, thanks to everybody that's come out and seen me before, all you new that came out today. I hope it's been good. It is daytime out there, it is spring, it is beautiful out. I suggest we all get out and explore. Thank you so much. We'll see you again sometime. If you didn't get a postcard, I ain't letting you escape. Pick them up here, that's how you find us again. Follow us on social media, and in the event you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with a burning question that I did not answer, just email me and I will get back to you with some kind of answer. So enjoy your day. Thank you so much for coming out. I don't know if y'all have any questions or if you're tired of sitting there in those seats and you're itchy to get out, but I'm happy to answer any questions for the next few minutes before I go. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any rules, laws, regulations prohibiting some of those cemetery activities, or is it just
You mean the things like prohibiting?
things like any of those, like the dog parks or
Yeah, so that stuff is all of those activities, including tombstone rubbing, is completely dependent on the facility. So there are public cemeteries and there are private cemeteries. In Massachusetts, there are no laws. I always say for the gravestone rubbing, in Massachusetts, there are no sweeping state laws that prohibit tombstone rubbing. If you go to New Hampshire, they actually have legislation on the book that governs activities, particularly tombstone rubbing in the cemeteries. All those other fun activities, they are completely at the discretion of the cemeteries. I find that the privately owned cemeteries, not the municipal, they have more freedom to do that stuff, to do any of those kind of activities, because they don't have to answer to the public. I live in Worcester. The beautiful rural cemetery that's just down the street from my house says they're going to have a movie night. And I was like, hooray, we're going to do this. As soon as they got press about having a movie in the cemetery, there was a complete uproar. Bad, awful, tasteless, sacrilegious, can't do it, shouldn't do it, bad, 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 and they canceled it. I served on the cemetery board of a friends group, and even within my group, we had somebody, today apparently the 5K is the reference today. There's a group that runs 5Ks in the cemeteries. They organize it, they pick up, they do all the promotion, they collect all the money, and half the money goes to the cemetery. And I'm on the board, and the group approached us, and so we're talking amongst ourselves about it. And even within the board, there was pushback. Well, you know, it's sacrilegious. No, it's not really. Well, what if there's a funeral? Well, we don't do funerals on Sunday, so we could have the run on Sunday. Well, you know, they're going to leave their trash. I'm like, I bet they won't. I bet they won't. Well, you know, what about injury and what if they trip in the potholes? Well, they probably have insurance. Can we just invite this guy in to find out about it? And I, as you may have picked up on, I'm very vocal. I'm very forward. So we're having this conversation, and there's two people on the board that are pushing back, and I've got answers because your objections are a little rickety. And finally, when they were all out of stuff to dispute, and I mean, well, you know, it's a road race. It's a 5K. It lasts like 25, 35 minutes. You know, we're not running a marathon here. And when they finally ran out of stuff to crab about, well, you know, I think it's going to bring the wrong element into the cemetery. And I'm thinking, you said that with a straight face, huh? I'm like, oh, yeah, you know, this is where I'm going to get cheeky. I'm like, oh, yeah, those 5K runners, they are a notably bad group. Yeah, rowdy bunch. You know, and all of that was just conversation amongst ourselves, whether or not to even let the guy come in and explain how it works to let it happen. So it has a lot to do with who's in charge and whether it's public or private. And again, outside of New England, I'm going to this stuff in all kinds of places around the country. Everybody else is doing it. All those things that the board brought up to me or brought up during that conversation, I think says volumes about how we in general feel about the spaces and the way they are used. How many of you have been into a 19th century cemetery, and at the gate there's a sign that says, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, no picnicking. You guys missed the point, because these things were originally set up to come and visit and be part of the landscape. And pack your picnic lunch. Bring your peanut butter and jelly. It's okay. Just clean up after yourself. So, yeah, I don't know what it is. Yes, ma'am?
You mentioned that the Mount Auburn Cemetery was the first rural and garden cemetery?
Yes.
The first in the U.S.?
In this country, yeah. There's, I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but there's something in the late 1790s that kind of starts that way. I want to say it was Pennsylvania. But Mount Auburn is typically recognized as the first modern cemetery of its time to be called a cemetery, as well as to be landscaped and look the way it does. Yes, ma'am.
Very nice presentation.
Oh, why, thank you. You might be a little biased. I think I know you.
My question is, would you happen to know if the Elm Street Cemetery, anyone has put those on Find a Grave?
Oh, probably. You guys know what Find a Grave is? So Find a Grave, for those of you who don't know, is a website. It's totally crowdsourced. So the company is based in California, and they had set up servers and infrastructure virtually through the website for anybody to be able to take pictures of gravestones and upload them onto Find a Grave. And Find a Grave's mission, Find a Grave's goal is to document every cemetery in the US. It might be North America, I can't remember, but it's definitely the US. So I know people that just go out, and that's what they do on a Saturday. They just take pictures of all the stones or certain stones, parts of the cemeteries, and they upload them to Find a Grave. It's a great repository for information. I always say, please take that information with a grain of salt, because I see a lot of stuff that's not correct, but it's just another point of information. And it's certainly easy. It's easy to use. There's actually an app for it. Find a Grave actually has an app for finding cemeteries. You download the app. I think you can upload pictures from the app as well, but I use it for finding cemeteries. So you launch the app, you say cemetery search, and it geolocates you on your phone, and it shows you a whole screen full of little tombstones, and there's a little blue dot. So the blue dot is you amongst the tombstones, and you can expand that window to see the individual tombstones that you can then click on and say, oh, this is the Elm Street Cemetery, this is Lakeside Cemetery, this is Pond Cemetery. Oh, well, I want to go to Pond Cemetery. So you tap the icon, the little gravestone icon for Pond Cemetery, and it takes you to that record, or it takes you to the records for that cemetery where you can see what's been loaded, what's been uploaded. There's also photo requests. If people from other parts of the country know that they've got somebody buried there, they can put a photo request in. That a lot of the people I know that do Find a Grave love to do that stuff because it's like a scavenger hunt. You know, you got to go out and find something, and then you're looking for something and hopefully satisfying a need for somebody that has an ancestor in that location that they haven't been able to locate for whatever reason, which is typically distance. You can also, even when you're in, say I'm in the record for Pond Cemetery, I look at all the photos, I look at all the photo requests, and I go, well, how do I get to Pond Cemetery? Well, you just pop the little arrow in the corner, it connects to your GPS, and it will give you the GPS route to get to the cemetery. That's how I found everything when I come to town, when I go to do stuff like that. Billion Graves is exactly like Find a Grave, except they have a more lofty mission. Again, fully crowdsourced, but their mission is not just to do the United States, it is to do every gravestone in every cemetery in the world. So you've got international content as well. Yes, ma'am?
Inside the Find a Grave app, if you're trying to find, you're in a cemetery and trying to find a family member, does it tell you, like, you're here, you got, their gravesite is over there?
Some of them do, yeah. If you've got somebody that's uploading content, they will often, if they know how, which is really not that hard to do, they will often put GPS coordinates that would lead you within at least a couple of feet or within a close proximity, so that if you have a really large location, or even, I mean, there's a ton of stuff just in Elm Street. So there's a couple I want to go back and take some pictures of, and I'm like, am I going to be able to find that? Because there's hundreds of stones on the cemetery, on the landscape, and so many of them look alike. So there's also different groups more and more, whether it's the cemeteries themselves. I know Salem State College is doing it. I know a bunch of different places at different levels, not just cemeteries, that are going out and geolocating, putting GPS coordinates by using drones on all the stones and making maps of the cemeteries. A lot of that stuff is coming online as well, so that the cemetery staff doesn't have to answer the phone and go look in the records for where somebody is buried. It's much more easily accessible, and you, as somebody searching for information, doesn't have to go to the office between 9 and 3 and get somebody to do that for you, or write a letter or send an email to get somebody to do it for you. Some of the cemeteries are even, and it's almost kind of antiquated if you can do everything through a website, but some of them, particularly the military cemeteries that I have seen it done at, they're putting kiosks outside, so that when you come, you just type in the name of who you're looking for, and they will show you how to find it on the grounds of the cemetery. So technology is absolutely being leveraged to help gather, preserve, and make more widely available gravestone and cemetery information. Yeah, if you get an opportunity, just search like cemetery drone movies or whatever. watching the drones fly and the bird's eye view that you really get to see the cemetery from, 50 feet, 100 feet in the air is really spectacular. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So Braintree, Plain Street, I live right near in that area.
Yep.
You said there's another grave, near there, like that you couldn't find?
So I don't know if I have my book or not. I might have my cemetery book. If I'm a good Gravestone girl, I have my cemetery book. Yeah, but apparently I'm not that good. I'm not that good.
Somebody gave you that information, like from Braintree? Or?
So there's a book. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I got that list of cemeteries from a book called Massachusetts Cemeteries, published by a guy. His name is David Allen Lambert. He is the head genealogist at New England Historical Genealogical Society in Boston. And what he does, this is the third edition, so it's the latest version of the book. He does not go out and look for all of them.
Right.
He goes through the historic, so the book is no pictures, it's all just a list. It's alphabetical by town, and then he has combed the historic record for information about burial grounds and cemeteries. And it can be everything from whatever he finds of a family plot to a modern cemetery. He has gathered all of that information and put it in a book to use as reference. What I do with that book, when I came to Braintree, I had my book, I had my atlas, I had my phone, and I plotted everything. I had plotted the 7 listings out on the atlas to try and be smart about the way I go around. And I couldn't find it. It was in his book, so it was in a historic record, and
Yeah,
he
I know
has
that area well. I know some of the.
he has citations about where he's getting this information. And all that says is first burying ground 1711, and then it says off Plain Street. That's all it says.
Right, it's a fairly, not that long of a road.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, is because a lot of times they disappear. Absolutely. A lot of times they're renamed. A lot of times more burials are done in that space, and it loses its original identity. But when I went into Plain Street, there was nothing that says 1700s in that burial ground. What I was thinking as I went over the bridge, or I went down the side road, the Plain Street Cemetery is over here.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of new-ish,
Yeah.
gigantic apartments.
Yeah,
There's
that's-
a huge
that's-
complex.
That was mined out in the 50s.
It is entirely possible, and it's just a complete theory on my part.
Go down and go to the right, so you head in that same direction.
Yep.
That's Plain Street. And
Yep.
there's some old houses there that historically there's, I think a Thayer lived down
Sure.
that road. So there's some old areas down
Yep.
that
And I went down Plain Street to see.
Right.
Because what I do when I use the book like that, if I, like for Lakeside, just said Lakeside and whatever the intersecting street was, and I'm like, well, there's a house next door, it's number 112. So I make a note in the book, 112 Washington Street. And periodically I give David the book back and he makes his updates. So I'm kind of verifying whether I found it or other information. The date on the sign says 1799, but you in the book, you've got 1745 or whatever. He does whatever with the info that I find. So I went down Plain Street to see if I could find any kind of, what does Plain Street look like now?
Yeah.
So it is possible that if it exists, it's somewhere off the road where I can't see it.
Right.
It is possible that during the building of anything, anytime after 1711, particularly in the 19th and particularly the 20th century, off it goes.
Right.
I've seen more and more of them. I know of more of them that we have lost because of modern, we call it progress.
Right.
I mean, I live in Worcester. My colonial burial ground, I don't have one. My colonial burial ground was put under in the mid-1800s. The stones were laid down on top of the graves and paved over to make way for the trolley tracks. Right? And we're all like, oh my God, how can you do that? Well, guess what? The trolleys were more important than the dead people in the center of town in 1872. Right?
Yeah, they definitely dig up. There was an area I heard it by Blue Hills. They found a bunch of bones
Absolutely.
They dug up.
Absolutely. I was actually surprised to find how modern Blue Hill was. It's dated like 1893. And it got a little bit of 19th century stuff in terms of marbles and that kind of stuff, but not much. It's firmly a modern cemetery.
And you talk about modern, know things nowadays. When you go by Braintree at Plain Street at night,
Yep.
it's lit up
Yeah.
with all the light.
I
Solar.
enjoyed that space so much,
Right.
partially because the trees were all in bloom and
Yeah, you go by there,
everything.
It's lit up like, what the hell's going on?
It's super modern, it's a modern landscape, but you can
Right.
tell that whoever, I'm going to assume it's private, but who knows, but I'm going to assume it's private because there's so much personal expression in there. The way the trees are planted, the way people are allowed to put all of their own personal mementos. They're allowed to
All my
plant
neighbors are in there
flowers
now.
and
My
have,
neighborhood moved into there.
yeah.
That's where they're all going.
It's a beautiful space, and you've got the more modern section over here, and then the one that's street side is later 19th century modern stuff. You've got a Grand Army of the Republic, a Civil War, like the American Legion, Grand Army of the Republic, a Civil War burial area for folks that served in the Civil War. So you can see the time travel there. And I think I might have said at the beginning, so there's that entry about the burial street, the first burial ground, 1711, off Plain Street. And then when I read the information about Elm Street, it says that it's the first burying ground of the second precinct. So you had a first precinct somewhere. Where is it now? You have to do a little bit of...
Quincy, Braintree, Randolph, and Holbrook were all Braintree.
Yeah, and that's entirely possible that when you cut, that's a great point. See, there's so much I forgot to tell you. It's a great point that when you're in a space, if you can't find something or you expect to see something, did we draw new lines and make new towns that now make something that was Braintree part of another town? Absolutely.
So maybe it's in Quincy?
It's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible. I didn't go that far to find out. But if you know where if we figure out where first precinct was. So you guys aren't far from Norwell, right? So when I did this for Norwell, right along Main Street, there's the first burial ground that was the second burial ground, but then they built a church over here, and then the third burial ground was actually the second precinct. I needed a map. I needed to draw myself a diagram about who belongs to what time period, and they were all very close in each other to creation date, but because of changes in town, building of churches, moving of things, one absorbs another, one breaks off from another. I'm going to do this once more, and then I'm going to let you all go because you got to know about this one because this is a great example. Go to, where is Yale? New Haven, Connecticut. Go to New Haven, Connecticut. And on the green is the only burial ground that actually is indoors. So there was a church on the green with a graveyard in the back. There was a schism within it, and I can't tell you whether they were Episcopal, Presbyterian, Congregationalists, I don't know. But there was a schism within the church, and one group was like, we're leaving. So they separated from that congregation, and they built another church right next door. And then there was some more uproar later, and it broke again. And now there's another church over here. So that first church with its burial ground out back says, we need more space for the church. We need to expand our building. Well, they couldn't go left and they couldn't go right. So they built over the burial ground. So they've got their they've got their church extension up here, and then essentially, for lack of a better comparison, the burial ground's in the basement. Fascinating. But that stuff happens all the time. We can't really fathom it because we don't do it today, but stuff gets absorbed, stuff gets removed, stuff gets built over, and we either preserve it or we lose it. Yeah, I'm very interested to know where that first precinct is and that first burial ground. All right, I will talk to you separately, and you can all stay if you want to hear me yammer on some more, but it's noon and y'all got to go if you want, or you can just stay. It doesn't matter to me. Thank you so much, guys.